Thank you, B-Sides Calgary, for inviting me. I'm super excited to talk about some of the ways that I've been able to change how we threat model at my current company. And I'm hoping that, I want to share the big successes of the program and talk a little bit about some of the challenges with it as well. And today we want to talk a little bit more about how we can change threat modeling. As an industry, we always talk about security should be everyone's responsibility. And I completely agree that we should do that. But let's redefine threat modeling and democratize it so that we can actually make it everyone's responsibility. So everyone knows how to do it and everyone is aware that it is their responsibility. Agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is threat modeling. I'm not going to do it too much of a deep dive into it. We'll just cover it at a high level just to get on the same page with one another. Then I'll talk a little bit about what self-serve threat modeling is. And then I'll do a deeper dive into the program, how we sort of set it up and what it all means when I talk about it. So a very quick intro about me. I'm a guy that did a ton of software development in my career, like a ridiculous amount. And then during that time, I've always been interested in security. And one day, a really, really smart security guy, he told me that, you know what, I should probably join his team and become a security engineer. And it took about a month, but he finally convinced me, and it was the best career decision that I ever made. That was a really, really long time ago. And now I try to help other people to get into security, which is why I'm involved with OWASP Vancouver and making sure that we provide content for people that are trying to get into the industry, as well as content for some of those folks that are been in for a while. So one fun fact about me, I'm really good at annoying my family because I talk a lot about risk. Having said that, I was not able to predict the toilet paper shortage at the beginning of the pandemic. Did not see that coming, if I'm being honest. We have a lot of toilet paper now. We should not, even if there is another shortage, we should be well taken care of with respect to that. Okay, enough about that stuff. Let's actually talk about threat modeling. Again, I don't want to go too much into the details, but I do want to cover the basics so that we're on the same page. What is threat modeling? The goal of threat modeling is fairly straightforward. We just want to identify the assets in our system and figure out the risks to those assets. Once we understand the risks, then it's possible for us to think about all the different ways that we can either protect the asset or attack that asset. So at the very base, threat modeling should be simple, it should be transparent, and we should ensure that everyone has a voice. Everyone's viewpoint is very different. They all come from different career, different backgrounds. If we take everyone's input, then it's easy for us to make sure that we're all on the build a much more robust system. Threat modeling is important for a lot of different reasons. As an industry, we talk about making security everyone's responsibility, but we also talk about shifting security left. And we talk about it because the further left you shift security, the more robust your systems can potentially become. So threat modeling is pretty far left. And we're performing security within the design phase. It also means that you can potentially fix vulnerabilities before they're actually created within the system. And we do that often. Like we make sure that as part of our program, we are capturing, we're getting caught in the design phase, and we are actually fixing vulnerabilities. Super cheap to fix it at that point. Threat modeling is also a great way to discover assets within your system. Now, whenever we architect a solution, if you know the assets that are part of the system, you'll think a little bit more about making it resilient. And you want to make sure that you'll either have an attacker mindset to see how you can potentially attack it, or you'll have sort of a defender one just to make sure that you know how to load balance it or make sure that it's resilient to even common mistakes within your system. Threat modeling is a great way to prioritize remediation efforts. You discover problems within, you'll discover a lot of problems within your system, and you have to actually prioritize it to figure out which ones are important that have to be mitigated immediately, like with either a change in design or a bunch of libraries that you can pull in for controls, or you'll figure out there's a bunch of really low priority or informational type of threats that you can actually deal with it at another time. So it really forces you to think about what is important, what's not. I love, for me personally, I love the paper trail of threat models. When I joined my current company, I peeked around, looked at all the other previous threat models that were done, and it gave me a great understanding of how we think as an organization about threats and how we want to address them. And also, having a paper trail, we have threat models that actually go stale. So you may have reviewed a particular system a year ago. Some of the assumptions that you made may no longer be correct. So you may, some of the low or informational priority vulnerabilities are now a lot, maybe medium or high, in rare cases even critical. So it's good to have a paper trail for all of this. And what we've done recently is actually started using our threat models and sharing it with our security researchers, so third-party vendors that are going to hit up our systems. And it really helps validate some of the assumptions that we make. And it gives us a little bit more confidence in those assumptions as well. So a lot of great reasons why threat modeling is important, but we really want to talk about redefining it. So threat modeling is hard, and it's a hard program to implement. So let's talk about different ways to make it a lot easier. And again, I should note that this is just one approach to it. There are other companies that are doing it different ways. This has worked really well for us. So there are a few problems that we're trying to solve. One is threat modeling is hard to scale. In many companies, there's very few folks that know actually how to threat model. And if the company grows, the problem is going to get a lot worse because usually you can't hire as fast as the engineering teams. And in those situations, developers might get blocked by security. So there's only a few options in that scenario. Either security kills themselves by trying to threat model everything, which isn't realistic. Development may get blocked and have to wait for security, which isn't great for velocity. Or security may have to pick and choose the type of things to threat model, which means a lot of systems may not you might not be able to do a security review of it. Usually dev gets blocked and security has to pick and choose what to threat model. Those are not ideal situations. So that's another problem that we want to sort of solve for. In my opinion, application security team should focus on the most important tasks. So that may include, like, we should be focusing on threat modeling, but I want to make sure that we pick and choose which threat models that we want to, which systems we want to threat model. But there could be other way more impactful things within the business that you might want to work on. So those low value threat models that you do maybe make sense for handing it off to someone else. So what is self-serve threat modeling? Well, in my utopian world, developers are going to do vast majority of threat models without security even being part of that process. That means that they're going to identify the assets, discover all the risks to those assets, prioritize those risks, and figure out which ones they want to remediate. And they can go there and redesign things if necessary. Security's focus should be on training engineers and making sure that they're getting better at threat modeling. The better and better and better they get at threat modeling, the less that you will be involved as part of the threat modeling process. So, and every year you should have new improved training that should be rolled out. So anyone new coming into the organization should get all of those trainings, and the people that are still here, the developers that are still here should get all the new trainings. I want to make sure that there's consistent learning. Goal is also, for us personally, was to make a bunch of mini security engineers throughout the organization. And having an army of mini security engineers just make sure that everyone is looking for problems within the systems. And the engineering team is really good at finding them and empowered to actually fix them. So if you discovered a flaw, a vulnerability in your system, you sort of own it. You have motivation to actually fixing it. And this is a great way for security to scale within the organization. With self-serve threat modeling, this will, it doesn't matter what size you have of organization, it doesn't matter if you have 100 engineers or 10,000, if everyone knows how to look for vulnerabilities as part of a threat modeling session, it can scale through whatever size you have for the organization. So having a look, does it solve our problems? Threat modeling is hard to scale. Well, when everyone is trained to threat model, by definition, we just scale a program. The engineering team can now do the vast majority of threat modeling sessions. So that is an easy problem to solve. Engineering should no longer be blocked by security. Since engineering is now doing the threat models themselves, they can do the security reviews themselves and don't have to worry about anything else. And finally, security engineers will be able to focus on the most critical of tasks. Again, it could be anything within the organization, whatever provides business value, and it could be threat models themselves. So does that mean it's time for vacation? Not just yet. I want to talk about some of the things what is not self-serve threat modeling. It's not an excuse that security isn't involved in part of the threat modeling process. So this is a program where security can actually focus their efforts. I want to make sure that I'm a part of the sessions that are talking about authentication, authorization. Is there PHI? Are these servers exposed to the internet? I want to be part of those ones. And anything that is internal that likely isn't going to get much use, maybe it's a service that gets hit once a month, I probably don't need to be involved in it, and I can trust that our engineering team can do it themselves. Self-serve threat modeling isn't an excuse to blame developers if they miss anything. We should not point fingers at the developers. I miss things all the time myself, which is why I make sure that whenever I do these sessions, I have a good group of folks that do it with me. So it's the program that failed. So it's a team effort. So we want to make sure that we understand why the vulnerability or risk wasn't identified. We work together to sort of mitigate those gaps. I know that you aren't going to fear it, but it doesn't mean that security is out of a job. We know that if one of our responsibilities is taken care of by someone else, there are still 100 other things that we have to deal with. So we talked a little bit about, again, I want to reiterate, this doesn't substitute other important security items like some of the threat models are being taken care of themselves, but you still need to have a robust program. So static analysis, dynamic analysis, bug bounties, pen testing, security metrics, all that sort of stuff is still an important part. So having self-serve threat modeling will help eliminate a lot of vulnerabilities in general over time, but we want to make sure that you still focus on other parts of your system. So how is the program set up? The way that we envision it, there's 4 parts of the program, 4 phases of the program. And what I personally think, it's really cut down to two pieces. So training phase, which is actually when people have to get trained. Observation, where I do a deeper dive into what these are individually. But observation is making sure that you're just reviewing, as part of the threat modeling sessions, just reviewing what's happening there. And personally, I feel that's just training V2, and the review is training V3, and security optional is actually security optional phase. So if you want to join, that's great. If you don't, that's okay as well. Let me deeper dive and explain to you what exactly is happening. Okay, training. In order to do self-serve threat modeling, engineers actually have to know how to threat model, which makes complete sense. And I had some principles when it comes to training. So enhance engineering's motivation to learn. I'm not too sure about you, but I tend to learn a lot when the material is fun and engaging. You want to make sure that the developers want to learn. They want to be part of your sessions, and they want to keep coming to them. So make the sessions interactive, have a lot of questions for the group. Keep the group small so that people aren't afraid to speak up or get involved. That's worked really well for us. You got to remember, security is a marathon, not a sprint. You don't have to do all the trainings in one go. I'll talk about how this is a multi-year program. So you don't have to do all of the threat modeling trainings in one sitting. Do the trainings in a way that it is easy to learn and retain that information. I also recommend you teach engineers the things that are relevant to your business. Threat modeling training should be done in the same vein as you actually do threat modeling in your organization. If you use risk assessment, train the engineers to do risk assessment. If you use Stride for finding vulnerabilities, train the engineers to do Stride. Incorporate your threat modeling workflow into the training so it's just a natural progression for them. Again, the goal of training is to teach people how they can do threat modeling and also to retain the most information. So with those principles in mind, we decided to spread out our training over 3 sessions because I didn't want to sit in a security course for an entire day myself. Whenever I go to Black Hat or OWASP conferences, I don't really retain too much information when I do the trainings. The trainers are there and they have to provide you, they charge you a lot of money, so they have to provide you all of this material. And I'll sit through 8 hours or 16 hours of training and I probably retain about 10% of it on a good day. On regular days, it's probably about 5%. So you got to remember, these folks are employees of the company. We're able to structure the training in any fashion that would provide the most benefits to them. So I split up the training into 3 sessions. The first one was an introduction to the concept of threat modeling, and we used Stride at work. So I want to make sure that the theory is there, and I gave them a little bit of hands-on practice so that they sort of get how to understand what the concept. And the second training that we put together is to introduce concepts of assets and data classification, and we get our hands really dirty with the threat model and split people into groups so they can do a deeper dive. And a third one, we actually do a threat model of one of the pieces of applications that they own. So that way they're very familiar with it. They know how to deal with it. So getting their hands super dirty. So again, this is split into 3 different sessions. We did it over a 6-week period. People, and each session was about an hour and a half. So it really made it easy for people to retain that information and get something out of these sessions. And I'll give you a link to the trainings themselves. It's all open source. We didn't think anything proprietary was in it, so we want to make it available to all folks. So I have a slide for that. Make sure you just screenshot that slide. Okay, some training takeaways. Again, it takes years for us security professionals to get good at threat modeling, and it's going to take engineering the same amount of time. And you need to bring that training to them. So you need to make sure that it is easy, digestible for them. We tried a few different ways to make sure that the concept of threat modeling was easy for them. So we started threat modeling things that were everything, like your everyday things. We threat modeled personal safety. We talked about how you do grocery shopping during COVID. And we really talked about risks and making them think about risks. So once they really understood those physical safety concepts, it was easier for us to translate them back to software, the software domain. I always recommend failing fast. I spent a lot of time just trying to build out the training in itself. But once I got it in front of folks, we dog fooded it. We gave it to the security team initially and got them to provide feedback. The beta engineering team got more feedback. It was about 98% of the way there. Did another beta engineering team and it was pretty much perfect. So the other challenge that we had is I've never done training over Zoom until COVID. So a few things that I usually do is I make sure that everyone has their video on, and I want people to be engaged. So I make sure that I warn people in advance. I ask random questions during the whole session so people are on their toes and they pay more attention. But ultimately, you want to make sure that the training is strong and engaging, and nothing can replace it. So we got a lot of great feedback from the training in itself. It made it easier for us to convince other folks to do it. Okay, so we moved on from the training. Everyone's trained at this point. We want to go to observation, which again, I feel it's training B2. You move from theory and you go into the hands-on apprenticeship part of it. So what I usually do is get the DRI, the directly responsive individual. I get them to get all of the appropriate people set up for the threat modeling session. So this DRI, they will get all the documentation involved. They will get the right people to schedule the threat modeling sessions themselves, and then they actually lead the threat modeling session themselves. This doesn't really take too much time extra from the engineering team. The DRI may put an extra half an hour to get all the documentation involved, and then the whole session might be another half an hour for all of the folks as well. The goal of this phase is to get engineering good enough to threat model on their own. I try to make sure that I don't tell the engineers themselves what are the vulnerabilities, but I do give them hints and coach them towards the vulnerabilities. And I want them work with them to sort of figure out how to prioritize the vulnerabilities, which ones are the ones that we should focus on, which ones we should remediate immediately, which ones we can leave for another day. And the goal is also to make sure that the engineers leave every threat model session feeling that they've learned something new, leaving with a very good, make sure that they're happy about it. They shouldn't go away being upset or sad about these sessions. They should be really happy about it. So once you start seeing them finding all the critical and high priority vulnerabilities, then you know that they're ready to move on to sort of that next stage. Again, some of the takeaways, again, you want to coach them. You want to make sure that you take them to a place where they can do it on their own. It's in our best interest for them to do it. I typically help the engineers with documentation. I use that one-on-one time to sell the threat modeling, like the purpose of it to the engineer, and just making sure that they understand how great it will be when security is no longer involved part of the process. Also, make sure that everyone knows it is a team sport. Make sure you have enough people in the conversation. There's enough diversity of opinions there too. I always DM people that are not talking enough in the threat modeling sessions. Everyone's voice counts. I also teach the DRI, the one that's responsible for the threat modeling session. I teach them to call people out that are being too quiet as well. The more conversations that we have part of the threat modeling session, the better it is for everyone. And I always close the loop with the engineer afterwards. I let them know they've done a great job. If there's some thoughts that I need to provide them, I do that as well. And some people are so good at it. Literally the first time that we did this self-serve threat modeling, me and another principal security engineer, we went into the threat modeling session. The engineers prepared the documentation, we got into the room, we talked about all the vulnerabilities that he discovered as part of it and how to remediate it. Literally, me and the other principal security engineer, we provided zero additional value. The engineer had discovered all of the vulnerabilities that we had in our mind, and I was super proud of him. It felt really bad because I felt that it was going to be relevant for longer, but this engineer just sort of made me feel that I was replaceable, which ultimately is what the feeling I wanted. But yeah, and we have several of them within our company. There are a lot of folks that still need a lot of coaching and experience to do it, but you will run into great engineers all the time. So again, just a little example, closing the loop with an engineer afterwards. This particular one killed it in a recent session, like really, really killed it. I'm super proud of them. I had a conflicting meeting for the last half of the threat model, but I felt very comfortable with leaving them in control and just doing their thing. So lots of great stuff there. And then the next phase is the review phase, where that's where we're sort of dabbling in my current company. Security is actively not involved in part of the process. The engineering team will do the heavy lifting. They'll prepare the documentation, they'll do the threat modeling sessions, and the artifacts is what the security team is going to review. So in reality, we've run into this situation a few times already at the company. There have been some situations where there have been miscommunications. The engineer didn't realize that they're not supposed to do the entire threat modeling sessions on their own. So when they put the documentation together, they've already done the threat model themselves. And in these situations, the engineers came up with amazing threats, and there weren't any critical or high vulnerabilities that they missed. They even found some stuff that I didn't even discover. It was pretty solid with that. So I'm hoping that the next time I give this particular talk, I can talk a lot more about the pros and cons about the review phase. We only have a few teams that are dabbling in this space right now. But we're really looking forward to the security optional phase. So this is the utopia that we all dream about. Security will be truly optional. Security should still be involved in certain situations. Again, we talked about security being involved with authentication, authorization, PII, PHI, anything touching the internet, that sort of stuff. Those are things that I'm concerned with. But I'm hoping with the security utopian optional phase in utopia, that we see a huge drop in critical and high vulnerabilities, and we have to pay more people more as part of our bug bounties to attract them. Now you can actually kick up your feet for reals. So Jason, you can take your vacation. Okay, program learnings. So I should have mentioned that threat modeling isn't all rainbows and chocolate chip cookies. This program has a lot of challenges. So let me start off by saying this is a multi-year program. And it's super rare that you have folks that stay on for more than a couple of years in your organization. So you need to make sure whoever is running this program is there for multi-years, or that there's a bunch of folks that can make this program happen. It's going to be a large and key investment from the security team. So you need to make sure that there is some sort of continuity, that this program will even last if someone key were to leave the organization. Again, this is a key investment, and it makes a ton of sense both from the engineering side and the security side, because it increases engineering velocity. Security team is involved in the most critical of threat models. But it is also a really hard program to manage by individual, and it requires a lot of focus and drive to get this going well. Training is hard for a lot of reasons. So I'm not too sure if you've ever delivered someone else's presentation. I've done that in the past, and it's brutal. It's super difficult because it's not your ideas, and you don't know really how well to do it. So what I usually recommend is you build out the slides and you train the trainers. And when you train the trainers, you have to give them the autonomy to do what they need to do with the training, so that they can make it their own and they have a sense of ownership. And also, you should train trainers. I delivered this training for about 120, 150 people initially. And I was really burnt out with the training in itself. Like I know the content inside and out, but after doing 2 quarters of it, I didn't want to look at it again for a while. So I took about a quarter off from it, but I trained the trainers in that point, let them deliver it. So you have to make sure you well balance this particular program with a lot of folks. You're going to still have your regular threat modeling challenges, same things that you all the time. So are the devs threat modeling all of the things? They're supposed to, but how can you be sure? How do you organize all of your threat models? Threat models do go stale. How do you ensure that you continuously threat model those items? These problems just don't go away when you have a self-serve threat modeling program. You need to make sure that you're vigilant and ensure that you're on top of things. Okay, so I'm at my current company. It was pretty easy. We only have we're probably close to 200 engineers at this point. But how do you scale this program to a company with several thousand developers? And I mentioned I personally trained about 80-90% of the engineers at my company, but scaling this to several thousand people, it's not going to be an easy task. I don't really want to make it a video workshop, because anytime I take any security trainings that are over video or privacy trainings, I just roll my eyes. So you need to structure in a way that you can scale it really well across the entire organization, but you still want to have a bit of that hands-on approach so that people actually take away some good learnings. Speaking of trained individuals, it's really hard to have a good ratio of folks that are trained in threat modeling. Trained people they continuously leave the company, and new people that are untrained join all the time. So you need to have a program where you're always training folks that are available. I try to convince HR that we shouldn't allow people to quit their jobs until they trained at least one other person with threat modeling. They definitely didn't go for that. So we'll have to find another strategy for it. This is just some of the bigger challenges with this program, but there are a ton of other challenges that you'll encounter as well. So you need a lot of focus and determination to do this. Okay, so I'm more than a year into this experiment. What have I learned? I talked about some of the great things, but there are some other things I do want to note. We are threat modeling a lot more than we've done in the past. I feel that the concept of threat modeling is now within reach within all of R&D, and they better understand what needs to be done, what's their role within it. The knowledge gap maybe played a big part of it. So now that there isn't as much knowledge gap, it is happening a lot more often. The engineers are way better at threat modeling than you are. They know their systems inside and out. This is something that I learned going through it. I, as a security engineer, I'll come in, I'll have to learn their system. I have about an hour or two just to figure that out. And then after that, I have to provide them with a list of all of the vulnerabilities. These folks work on their systems day in, day out. They know where all of the bodies are buried. They now have a framework in which they can identify these issues and call them out as well. So they are way better. There are a lot of vulnerabilities I could not discover, and they just knew where they were. I always tell folks, engineers don't have to be perfect at threat modeling. They just really need to notice the big issues. But having said that, if there are enough folks in the threat modeling sessions, they will notice the little ones as well. Our security culture has improved leaps and bounds. And I know a ton of more folks that are interested in security. So I don't know if they're more interested because they understand security more, or now that they're exposed to what security is really like and it's more interesting to them. It doesn't matter in my books. The more people that are interested in security and wanting to help us out makes my job a lot easier. I get DMs all of the time around questions around security. One of my favorite stories as a part of this is that we do use Golang often as part of our application, and Golang dropped some high security vulnerabilities. One of our engineering managers, he went in, he discovered where all the vulnerabilities are, told us that these 2 matters, these 4 don't matter because we're not using that functionality. But that's something that I would be doing. But he felt empowered to, now that he knows a little bit more about security, he felt empowered to actually do it. So I keep mentioning about failing fast. I had analysis paralysis with the training in itself. Once I got it out there, once we dogfooded on the security team and I tested out on the beta engineering teams, I moved really quick with iterating on the content, and I got it in the hands of as many people as possible. So with that, how do you get started? How can you do this sort of thing? So there's links for self-serve stuff. I had a blog post. You can have a look. There's a little bit more content there about the program. I sort of mentioned that we have open source the training in itself. You can download it. I have my speaker notes in there. Feel free to use that for yourself. I also set up like an email address. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. I sort of want to emphasize that we are a community. We all need to work together to make software safer. We don't need to hide all of the things that we do. There are things that we can share and we can work together. My goal of this is that I want to get it. I'm doing this selfishly. There are a lot of really smart security people out there. I want to get it into all of your hands so that you can see the program, you can iterate on it, and then I can steal your ideas and incorporate it into my program. So again, this is feel free to take it, modify it, do it however you want with the training slides. Okay, so questions. You can hit me up on sstm@segment.com. Hit me up on Twitter if you have any questions. Scott had one, how long does a threat modeling session typically take? Great question. It really depends. We've had some, I think our typical ones that we set up are about an hour and a half. Usually we have about an hour for the trainings. Like pre self-serve threat modeling, we usually have about an hour, but we want to make sure that we have a bit of extra time just because we want to coach people instead of tell people where the vulnerabilities are. And we want to work with the team we don't want to say the prioritization of it ourselves. We want to make sure that we work as a team to discover the prioritization. So it takes a little bit longer to make sure that we do it. What does a threat modeling artifact documentation look like? How do you know it is stale? Oh man, that's a great question. So artifacts, we have a SDD, a software design document, as part of our SDLC. So within that, within there, we have a security section, and within the security section, we have a threat modeling section now. And we get people to fill that out. So whenever we review things, we just review the actual threat model results and making sure that they discover all the threats and vulnerabilities there. How do we know it goes stale? We move really rapidly at my company. Anything that's over 9 months or a year the system is vastly changed. So although we're threat modeling all the new features that come in, there's still bug fixes and other stuff that happen that drastically change the architecture of some of these systems. So we still need a program in which to identify when things go stale, when things are changed, so that we can get involved and re-review some of these things at time. Just looking to see if there's any advice for a team that does not have any security staff, just engineers willing to learn, but lack of knowledge, experience in security. I feel your pain, Igor. I remember starting that way in my career. I just recommend that what I've done in the past is that we did lunch and learns on security. We had a security champion. That was me at that point. And what I did was I ran lunch and learns. I had people go through a program that is set up and how to discover vulnerabilities in the system, and sort of lit a light bulb in their mind so that they know that, hey, someone can attack our system with a NexusS vulnerability, or watch out for this SQL injection. So a lot of that sort of stuff made it just chatting with one another. Again, like I'm good at certain things. Other people are great at other things. So I make sure that once we had discussions, there's no full-time security experts there. We just have those discussions. It just made it better for all of us for it. Perfect. Yes, Josh, we will have to catch up at some point. What tools do you use to track schedules? Who's been trained? Who needs a refresher? Oh man, great question, Simon. I initially did this all through Google Sheets. We do have an LMS learning management system that we have migrated into. I might actually this week, tomorrow, I'll be chatting with the person that runs the LMS and getting them to actually schedule and make sure that we are training all of our engineers. So I'm lucky that I can hand that off to someone else. When implementing this program, did you have any problems with a liability hot potato where no one wants to take responsibility if something goes wrong? That's a great question. I feel that I would have gotten that at previous companies, but at my current company, we have real strong ownership, and everyone has literally bought into security. So the C-suite and downwards, I will regularly have our chief product officer. We send a weekly security metrics email. He will call out if he notices a spike, or if he notices that security has sort of plateaued, number of vulnerabilities, or the time that we need to address them. So they will call it out. So things aren't like that at my particular company, but I can see that with other folks. What we've done in general at our company is we've taken security out of the conversation. We've really democratized our security vulnerabilities, our threat modeling process, and we made it the responsibilities of the director of engineering or VP of engineering. So, for example, we have vulnerability tickets. Vulnerability tickets take time to get remediated. Most companies have an exception process with when to If the things are taking longer than normal, security is always chasing down people to say, hey, you got to fix these things. We've stopped doing that. We've actually put the responsibility on the engineering teams. If it's like a P4, P5, the engineering managers themselves can extend the timelines for when things are going to be fixed. If we have a P2, it goes to our chief product officer. So if you're asking him for an extension, you may get a lot more questions than you anticipated. And next time you'd want to make sure that you're fixing things on time. So, so with respect to that, pushing the risk onto the engineering teams and to the leadership within engineering has made it a lot easier for us to reduce the hot potato situation. Did you find people are resistant to training? How do you communicate it's important? Great question. So a lot of people were initially worried about it, but I think the word got out with how fun the training was in itself. I try to make it really easy and digestible for folks. So, and I got a lot of great feedback, which is why I want to fail fast and iterate through it a bunch of times, so that making sure that I deliver the best sort of training to those folks. But I try to make sure it's not like typical security training that they may receive where they're rolling their eyes and not wanting to listen. So yeah, I make sure that it's fun and engaging, and I have a bit of that personality, so I call out on people. I make sure that I follow up with them, making sure that they understand that sort of stuff. So make sure that I really pay attention to the individuals, because I know it took me a few years to get good at threat modeling, and I know it's going to take them. So I came in with a lot of empathy. Perfect. Awesome. If we don't have any other questions, again, you can feel free, hit me up. Ask Jeevan Singh on Twitter, sstm@segment.com. Email, we have the blog post, we have the open source, the training itself. Have a look, chat with it, iterate on it, make it better, share with me how you made it better, so then I can roll that into my program in itself. Cool. Do you recommend any tool to do threat modeling? So there's actually a few companies that are in this space. Our goal was to sort of make mini security engineers within our organization, which is why we want to teach people how to do threat modeling in itself. But there are a few in the space. OWASP, I think OWASP has Threat Dragon. Microsoft has their tool as well. Those are great tools. I know that some other companies with self-serve threat modeling, they've gone down the tooling path where they teach people how to use the tool. That scaled a lot better for them. And so I personally can't really recommend anything. I used the Microsoft one in the past. It's great. It captures everything, but it's also overwhelming if you are someone new to it. It'll come up with 20 different threats, and then you're like, okay, which ones are important, which ones are not. So it's hard for me to recommend anything particular at this moment. All right, folks, have a great one. Nice chatting with you all.